afterwards and on YouTube at a later date. So today we have with us Kazu Haga. Kazu Haga is an author and nonviolent communicator with over 25 years of experience in nonviolence and restorative justice, weaving Buddhist practice and trauma healing into social change work. A founding member of Ahimsa Collective and author of Healing Resistance and Fierce Vulnerability, he teaches globally in prisons, schools, and activist movements. His journey began in 1998 with a pilgrimage retracing the slave trade, followed by a monastic study in South Asia. Now based in Oakland, Kazu is a dedicated meditator, nature lover, and Boston Celtics fan. It's 7 a.m. where he is right now, so we're also celebrating the fact that he's with us and is an early riser. So for today's session, in a world marked by accelerating crises and deepening uncertainty, it is easy to respond from urgency, fear, and fragmentation. Yet a principled approach to nonviolence asks something different of us. It asks us to ground, not just in strategy or reaction, but in a deep trust that our lives are part of something far greater than ourselves. In this session, we will explore what it means to root our work in a larger field of belonging and examine how disconnection from this larger perspective can lead movements to replicate, harm, destabilize our communities, and escalate ecological and social collapse. So, on that note, I'm going to hand it over to you, Kazu. Thank you for being here with us, and thank you to all of you who are present with us today.
Thank you so much, Annabelle. Thank you all for being here. Good to be with you all. I'll just start by sharing that I have a little cough, so you may hear me coughing throughout. So hopefully it's not too bad. But really grateful to be here with a group of people who are not afraid to talk about where we are at this moment in human history. This moment that many people call the poly crisis. I feel like I was just talking to some people the other day about how many people understand that that is where we are, right? That we are at this choice moment as a species, that we are at this moment where we are facing potentially the biggest crisis we have ever faced as a species in the history of our entire species. We know that, we understand the science, and then we just go about our days as if that's not the case. And we go about our days working on our 5-year strategic plans and our election campaigns and all these things as if we're not in a state of emergency. And it's actually really destabilizing to my nervous system to know that I'm surrounded by people who understand that we are in a crisis, but then continue to live our lives as if things are normal. And I have a lot of empathy about why. I get why we do that because it's an incredibly scary thing to actually face, to actually look at where we are as a species, right? And it's such a scary thing that for many of us, the moment we start to actually deepen into the reality of this moment, our nervous system dysregulates. And the part of our brain that is capable of imagination and of visioning and of hope and of empathy gets shut down, and we're only able to operate from our survival mechanisms, which is only able to look at the thing that is directly in front of us, and we're not able to look at the big picture. So I understand why it happens, but as the American thinker, revolutionary James Baldwin, writer, said that not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. And so we're in this moment where we have to somehow learn to face the biggest, most scary moment in the history of our species without collapsing. And how do we do that? So, I'm here with you just for an hour, but there's this day-long festival of resistance. Unfortunately, it's 7 a.m. Like Annabelle said, where I'm from. So I'm just waking up. But we have an entire day to be in this community to talk about what it means to face this moment. Again, my name is Kazu Haga. I'm a father and a writer and a trainer and a practitioner of nonviolence, of restorative justice, of Buddhist practice. I'm a member of an intentional community here in Oakland, California, on occupied Lisjan Ohlone land called Canticle Farms. Canticle Farms is a community of about 40 to 45 people, diverse across every identity marker you can imagine. And we're rooted in the practices and theories of nonviolence and restorative justice and the work that reconnects, which is the body of work that was created by a recent ancestor, Joanna Macy, a Buddhist and environmentalist who taught us that we are in this moment of the great turning and the great unraveling, where everything we thought we knew about what it means to be human is in the process of changing and in the process of collapse, and something new is being born again. My own work is at the intersection of trauma healing and spiritual practice, very broadly defined, and nonviolent action, and really taking the lessons that we've learned from individual and interpersonal healing and seeing if we can bring those lessons to scale, and work on systemic change work and see it as an opportunity for us to do collective healing work together. And, I think just because of my own work and the community that I live in and the friends that I have, and I think a lot about the crisis that we are in, right? And I know, and science suggests, that this crisis is just going to get harder and harder. It's going to get worse and worse. If it gets better at all, even in our like best case scenarios, things are going to continue to spiral out of control. Things are going to continue to get harder before it gets better, right? If it gets better at all. And so, as a practitioner of nonviolence, I've always been taught as the violence escalates, we need to escalate our nonviolent response to that conflict, right? Which is why if you go to someone who's experiencing a low intensity level of conflict, it's perfectly appropriate to go to that person and say, "Hey, everything's going to be fine. Just take a deep breath. Let me give you a hug. It's all going to be okay." But if you go to someone who's extremely agitated and is about to like completely snap, and you go to that person and say, "Hey, everything's going to be just fine. Just take a deep breath. Let me give you a hug. It's all going to be okay." You might get punched in the face because it's not the appropriate response to the extremely escalated level of conflict that you're responding to, right? And at the social scale, it's also why if you're responding to a low intensity level of conflict, filling out a petition might be the perfectly appropriate response. But if we're responding to centuries of state violence against Black people in the United States, if we're responding to the genocide of indigenous peoples, if you're responding to the climate crisis and the biggest catastrophes that we've ever faced as a species, then filling out a petition might not be the appropriate response, right? Occupying highways, shutting down government meetings, shutting down corporate board meetings, those might feel like the more appropriate response. But I've noticed in my time that as we start to use more and more escalated tactics of nonviolent resistance, the more we tend to also escalate certain worldviews that I feel like are the foundation, are the underpinnings of why we got into this mess in the first place. And about how oftentimes in response to crises, we create more and potentially bigger crises. In response to the urgency of this moment, how we might be unconsciously leading from a place of panic, leading from a place of trauma, leading from a place of our own urgency, which is not a place that is conducive to healing, right? There's a West African teacher named Bayo Komolafe, who many of you may know, who says, "The times are urgent, we must slow down." And I read an interview with him once where he said he gets some pushback sometimes. And he says, "Well, Bayo, like, look at the state of the world. We don't have the privilege to slow down. We have to keep going." And Bayo says, slowing down is not a function of speed. Like slowing down is not about saying, "Oh, we need to go on vacation and stop doing all of our work and leave all this behind." He says slowing down is about deepening our awareness and noticing who's in the room. And so, what does it take for all of us? I used to have a friend who was a direct action trainer, and she used to say that there's always time to take a breath. Even when a riot police is running towards you with a baton, getting ready to club and arrest you, there is still time to take a breath. Right? So what does it mean for our movements as a collective to have enough of a regulated nervous system to remember to keep breathing as we occupy the government building, as we shut down the highway, as we engage in the actions that we know we need to continue to engage in? What does it mean to learn to continue to keep breathing so that the part of our brain that is capable of imagination and visioning is intact, is online? In my opinion, I believe that grounding ourselves in the theories of nonviolence is what can help us stay connected to that part of our brain that is capable of imagination. And nonviolence, the word nonviolence has a bad rap. It is one of the most misunderstood words in the English language, I believe. And because it is so severely misunderstood, it has been used by the state to pacify movements, to neutralize movements, right? It has been used in very dangerous ways. And so I want to share a little bit of how I've come to understand the word in my 25 years of being in nonviolence. Um, I used to think when I first started this work that nonviolence was about not throwing a Molotov cocktail while I'm at a political demonstration. Right? As long as I'm protesting and I'm not engaging in property destruction or throwing Molotov cocktails or hurting people, then I'm practicing nonviolence. But I later came to understand that if that's my limited understanding of what the word nonviolence means, then I could make the argument that the Ku Klux Klan uses nonviolence when they hold their marches. Because at least while they're holding their marches, they're not engaged in violence. They're just marching. And I always felt that something is wrong with that picture, that there is nothing that a white supremacist organization or Nazis or all these people can do that is nonviolent. And I later in my life learned that nonviolence is about so much more than not choosing to use physical acts of violence. And so I want to share a couple of slides to talk a little bit more about why that is. I want you to take a look at these two pictures and see if you can identify the difference between these two images. I'll give you a couple of seconds to do that. Excuse me. So there's four differences in this image: the bird, the butterfly, the flower, and the color of the post. This next one is a little bit more difficult. There's a few more differences. What is the difference between these two images? I'll give you a few seconds to do that as well. And there's a few more differences in this image. I'm not sure if you caught all of them, but there's the apples in the tree, the reflection on the window, the pig's mouth is open, the color of the suspenders are a little bit different. We're going to do one more. What is the difference between these two? Nonviolence and nonviolence. I imagine many of you can notice right away, oh, I think that the circle might have shown up earlier than I expected. But the word nonviolence on the left is hyphenated, non-hyphen violence and non-violence without the hyphen. And I think many people use these two words interchangeably, right? Whether there's a hyphen or not, people think it means the same thing. But I learned through, particularly through my study of the work of Dr. Martin Luther King, that these two words are radically different. That when you hyphenate the word, what it does is it changes the word and turns it into an adjective. Non-hyphen violence is essentially two words. Non-hyphen violence says that something is not violent. Something is the absence of violence. And again, as I just shared, the idea that nonviolence is simply about not being violent is the biggest and most dangerous misunderstanding of the word nonviolence. And I want to share two stories about why that's the case. This is the view from the apartment that I used to live in for about 13 years until about 5, 6 years ago, I moved out of this place. This is in a neighborhood in Oakland, California called Funktown. And it's a beautiful neighborhood. It's one of the most diverse neighborhoods in Oakland, which is one of the most diverse cities in the United States. It's a neighborhood where just outside of my window, just on this block that I used to live in, there's about six languages that are being spoken every single day. And it's also a neighborhood that has a lot of challenges, right? There's a lot of uh, conflict, escalated forms of conflict. Like people were screaming and arguing every single day. In the 13 years that I lived there, there are multiple shootings and murders that happened exactly on that corner. Like this was the view that from my kitchen corner. So I used to sit, every day just eating my meals, looking out the window. And my 13 years there, like I saw a lot of crazy things happen on that corner. And many years ago, I was taking a nap. I was about 10 o'clock in the morning. I had gone back to sleep. This was before I had a kid when I had the opportunity to go take a nap at 10 in the morning. Those were the days. And I was woken up by a commotion outside. There was a couple who was arguing, a man and a woman. And, this was such a daily occurrence that I was actually just trying to ignore it and go back to sleep. But this fight kept getting louder and louder and louder. And I finally, at some point, decided to get up out of my bed and look down the window. And right below my window, there was a woman on the ground who was getting beaten. And she was screaming and asking for help. And so I jumped up out of my bed. I put on my clothes. I put on my shoes. I ran downstairs. I opened up the gate. And by this point, they had gone across the street to the corner that you see in this image. And it was still going on. And so I ran across the street and I broke up this fight. And by the time I got down there, about 15 of my neighbors had all heard the commotion and they had all come outside and they were just standing around watching this woman get beat, not doing anything to help. And I always argue that all of my neighbors who were just standing around watching this woman get beat were practicing non-hyphen violence, right? They were explicitly not being violent. And in fact, you can even make the argument that I was more violent than my neighbors were because I did use a limited amount of physical force to pull the two people apart, and I might have hurt one of them in the process, right? So if your understanding of nonviolence is simply the absence of physical violence, then you can see how you can use the word nonviolence to justify violence happening right in front of you and doing nothing about it. You can see how big of a difference it makes. Nonviolence is not, part of the work of nonviolence is about not hitting people, but so much more than that. Nonviolence is not about what not to do. It's so much more about when you see violence and injustice happening in your life, in your family, in your society, what are you going to do about it? Right? Nonviolence is much more about what you're going to do about violence than what you're not going to do about it. All of my neighbors who are just watching this woman get beat, not doing anything to help, that is the dynamic that we constantly see play out throughout society, regardless of what country you are in. That is what we're always seeing. We see state violence against marginalized communities. We see the destruction of our ecosystems. We see unbridled capitalism creating poverty. And most people in society say, well, that's none of my business. It doesn't affect me. I feel bad, but for those people, but, hopefully something will change. That's the same thing that my neighbors were doing, just watching this woman get beat, not doing anything to help. That is not nonviolence. As a Buddhist practitioner, as a meditator, I will say that people who spend thousands of dollars going to meditation retreats, just hoping that the world gets better and practicing themselves and living in this delusion that I can be liberated without addressing systemic violence, that is not nonviolence, right? Nonviolence requires us to do our inner work to purify our own heart of the violence, the seeds of violence that all of us carry. But it also requires us to look at the systemic forms of violence that causes that internal violence in our heart every day to begin with. And I want to share another story about an unsung hero from the United States civil rights movement. This is a picture of a woman named Autherine Lucy. She was the first Black student to ever go to the University of Alabama in Tuscaloosa. Now, if anyone knows anything about not just the history, but like the current reality of the United States of America, you will know that Alabama still to this day is one of the most racist states in the entire country. So you can imagine in the mid 1950s what the environment of that campus was like the first moment Arthur and Lucy stepped foot on campus. These are some of the images of what took place that day. A riot broke out. The Ku Klux Klan came and burnt a cross in the middle of the campus. People threw stones at her. You could see a mob surrounded the car that she was traveling in, and people climbed up on top of it and jumped up and down. So, if you can imagine, what do you think the school did to respond to all of this violence? They didn't do nothing. They actually did do something to respond to this violence. What they did was they threw Arthur and Lucy out of the school. They expelled her. They said, your presence is causing a threat to the security of our school. All of this violence is happening because you're here. So, in order for us to protect our school, you need to leave. The next day, because she wasn't on campus anymore, the riots had stopped, right? The riots stopped. So, the local newspaper ran this headline that said, things are quiet in Tuscaloosa today. There is peace on the campus of the University of Alabama. There is peace on the campus of the University of Alabama. Now, I imagine most of you would disagree with the idea that there was peace on the campus of the University of Alabama. And I want to ask the question, why? Like, the riots had stopped, right? The violence stopped. So why was that not peace? Dr. Martin Luther King gave one of my all-time favorite sermons in response to this incident. And I really want to recommend that you all Google it and read the sermon. It's just like a page long. It's really easy to find. The name of the sermon is When Peace Becomes Obnoxious. Martin Luther King, who's the winner of the Nobel Peace Prize, a lifelong peace advocate, gave a sermon called When Peace Becomes Obnoxious. And in this sermon, he quoted a peace educator named Johann Goltang, who came up with this idea of negative peace. Dr. Martin Luther King said what happened on the campus the next day wasn't a real peace, it was a negative peace. Negative peace, he said, is the absence of tension that comes at the expense of justice. He said that this is the type of peace that, quote, stinks in the nostrils of the Almighty God. And that this is the kind of peace that all people of goodwill should be trying to fight against. Negative peace is the perception of quiet and calm that comes at the expense of justice, right? Like when we think of peace, we oftentimes think that, oh, as long as things are quiet, as long as things are calm, it's peaceful. But I guarantee you that the moment the bomb was dropped on Hiroshima, things got really quiet. And is that peaceful? If someone is screaming in my face, that's not peaceful. And if I punch them in the face and knock them unconscious, oh, they're not screaming at me anymore. So did I just create peace? Am I a peacemaker? As absurd as that idea is, because of our society's gross misunderstanding of the idea of peace, this is how we go about trying to create peace, right? Our nation states wage war to create peace. Because if we just kill all the terrorists, then we will have peace. Mass incarceration. If we just lock up all the criminals, then we will have peace. The same thing with things like the militarization of the police, right? If all these protesters would just go home, then we would have peace. Dr. Martin Luther King said that if Black people accepted second-class citizenship, then things would be more quiet in your neighborhood because we wouldn't be out there protesting. But that is a far cry from peace. And there's another form of negative peace that is really prevalent in many of our lives, in many of our family homes, in many of our communities of faith and NGOs and higher education, in professional environments where, I'm Japanese. I was born in Japan. Japanese people, we love negative peace, right? As a culture, we don't have the skills and the cultural norms to have conversations about difficult subjects. We like to try to suppress everything and pretend that everything is okay. Japan is a very quote unquote peaceful society that has one of the highest suicide rates in the entire world, that has one of the highest domestic violence rates, alcoholism rates, because we don't know how to talk about trauma. We don't know how to talk about injustice. We don't know how to talk about power imbalances. We don't know how to talk about the problems plaguing our society. We just like to suppress it and pretend everything is fine. Like this family who is not able to talk about the difficult things that they need to talk about in order to get to a real sense of peace. And so if that's negative peace, then positive peace can actually look loud and messy because we are having conversations about what it takes to bring justice to all people by addressing root causes. Peacemaking in a culture where violence is the norm is a loud and messy process. This image of young children getting hosed down by the police and fire department in Birmingham, Alabama in the mid 1950s. This is not a peaceful image, but in some ways it is closer to positive peace than that image of the family who was having an awkward family dinner, not knowing how to have the conversations that is necessary to create real peace. When you see images of protesters creating disruptions, that is closer to a real sense of peace than people who look away and say, oh, that's none of my problem. I'm not going to get involved. Right? The point of nonviolent direct action is oftentimes to create disruption. Dr. Martin Luther King, if you've noticed, King is one of my greatest teachers. I've had the privilege to be mentored for many years by elders who work closely with Dr. Martin Luther King. So you'll notice me reference him a lot. Dr. Martin Luther King was arrested almost 30 times throughout his short life before he was assassinated. And half of those times, one of the criminal charges that the United States government charged him with, literally one of the criminal codes that he supposedly broke, was disturbing the peace. He was arrested and charged countless times for disturbing the peace. One of the greatest peacemakers the United States has ever known was being constantly accused by the United States government for disturbing the peace, which is an absurd thing to think about. But when we use nonviolence as a way to force conversations that society refuses to have time and time again, we are not disturbing peace. We are disturbing complacency. We are disturbing the normalization of violence. When we are witnessing the extinction of countless species every single day, the destruction of countless ecosystems, war and genocide and poverty and all of these issues that we are facing, and we like to pretend that that is normal, we will need to disrupt that complacency, the veil of negative peace that tells us that this is what peace means. This is what normal means, right? And so if these are the ways that we have gross misunderstandings of the idea of peace and the idea of nonviolence, what does the word nonviolence actually mean? Because it's not just about disruption for disruption's sake. This is the central question of my life. This is the question that I've been asking myself every single day for the last 25 years in some ways. So responding to this question could take all day, could take lifetimes. Part of what I want to share is that nonviolence is a practice, right? Nonviolence is not something that anybody ever becomes. I am not a nonviolent person. I am a nonviolence practitioner. In the same way that, I've had a meditation practice for decades now. I don't become meditation. It is not a thing to become. And also, people could attend, let's say, a 2-day karate seminar or a week-long karate seminar, and nobody ever goes to a week-long karate seminar and walks away saying, "Oh, okay, I understand what karate is. I don't need to practice it anymore because I get it. I understand what it is." Right? If you have a karate practice, you practice it 2, 3, 4 times a week for the rest of your life. And the hope is that by repetition, by constant practice, the theory of karate becomes like muscle memory, so that when you actually need to use it in real life, it comes out naturally. But it's never a thing that you become, and it's never a thing that you stop engaging in the practice. Another thing about nonviolence, and I think this is to me, what has become the essence of nonviolence. If I could boil down the word nonviolence to one thing, it is about having an unwavering knowing in our bodies that we live in an interdependent universe. To me, this is the most important aspect of the word nonviolence. There's a couple of quotes that I love. Dr. Martin Luther King has a famous quote where he says, "We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny, that whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly." Right? This idea that we are all bound with each other and that nothing can happen to you without that in some way affecting me indirectly. And there's science that is beginning to uncover this as well, right? That if we look at the quantum level, all of the cells and the atoms that make up our bodies are woven together in ways that it is so complex that we can never fully comprehend, right? And also, there's a indigenous Aboriginal activist from Australia, Leela Watson, who says, "If you have come here to help me, you're wasting your time. But if you have come here because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together." And both of these quotes are popular in a lot of social justice spaces that I've been in. But I oftentimes ask, these are nice quotes to say, but how much do we really believe these things? And when we say things like justice for all, are we really working for justice for all people? Or are we working for justice for the people that are on, quote, our side of the argument? Are we believing that the universe weaves separate webs of interdependence based on our political affiliation? That my liberation is only bound with the liberation of the people who agree with me on various political beliefs or share certain political values? For me, I've come to understand that interdependence is a universal law in the same way that gravity is a universal law. There are people in this world that don't believe in gravity. It does not matter because gravity is a universal law. Whether or not you believe in gravity, you are still bound by the laws of gravity. And I believe the same is true about interdependence. There are people who may not believe that we don't live in there are people who may not believe that we live in an interdependent world. But to me, I've come to believe that it doesn't matter because that is just the way that our universe is structured. We are bound by its laws. I want to go back to science a little bit. Scientists, cosmologists, astrophysicists will tell us that before the Big Bang, the building blocks of everything that exists in the entire universe, the things that make up everything that has ever existed in this universe, everything that will ever exist in this universe, the things that make up my body and your body and the computer screen that you are looking at and our sun and the moon and the star that is the farthest star away from us in the entire universe, time and space itself all existed on a singular point. And from that singular point, the Big Bang happened, spreading the building blocks of everything that will ever exist in the entire universe out into space. And so it is also a scientific fact that we all came from the same source, that we all used to be one, right? And so I'm going to stop my screen share and just share a couple more thoughts, and then I want to open it up for people. This idea that we are bound with each other in ways that science still cannot fully comprehend. In my view, in ways that our intellectual brains will never fully be able to comprehend. It's a beautiful thing because it is what ties me to the earth and the sun and the moons, right? It is also what ties me to people that have different political beliefs than I. And that is one of the most challenging parts of practicing nonviolence. For me, it's easy to go to a demonstration and risk arrest and all these things. It's actually hard to remember that the people on the other side of that police line, the other side of that political aisle, are also part of this galaxy and somehow belong to us, belong to me. I might have mentioned, or I think Annabelle mentioned in my bio that I've had the privilege to work with a lot of incarcerated people. I work with a lot of people in prison, and throughout California and throughout the United States. And most of the people that I work with are lifers, which means they're people serving life sentences, which means they're all people who have committed serious harm, like serious, serious harm. I've worked with hundreds and hundreds of people who have done the worst things that we could possibly do to another human being. Um, and they, many of them have become my greatest teachers and best friends and are some of the most dedicated peacemakers I've ever met in my life. In working with people who have committed a lot of harm, I've come to understand that as a human being, when we cause harm to another human being, that fractures a part of who we are. That damages a part of our soul. There's a saying that we use in restorative justice that hurt people, that when we are feeling hurt and we don't have healthy ways to release our pain, we release it onto somebody else, right? So hurt people, hurt people. But I realized that there's a second half to that equation, that hurt people, but that hurting people hurts. That when we hurt somebody else, it hurts a part of who we are. And I've seen this time and time again, talking to hundreds of people who have really hurt a lot of people. And some part of them gets broken in the process of them causing harm to other people. I have never seen an exception to this rule. And I think part of that is because using violence, whether it's physical or emotional, requires us to live in the delusion of separation. And that the delusion of separation damages our soul. Think about what I've come to believe as the reality that you are deeply, deeply bound with the earth and with the sun and with the hundreds and hundreds of billions of suns that exist in the galaxy. That is who you are, right? Like our bodies, the things that make up our bodies, this is science, this isn't theory. The things that make up our bodies were literally forged in a star. That is who you are. To go from that reality to this delusion that says, I'm alone, that I don't belong to you, that I don't belong to the rest of the cosmos. To go from the bigness and the sanctity of who we are to this delusion that I'm an independent being that is not in relationship with everything else that exists is so scary. It is deeply, deeply traumatizing. It is a trauma that I think most of us, if not all of us as human beings, carry on some level. This fear that we are alone, this fear that we don't belong. But that to me is the essence, that is the seed of violence. It is that delusion that says I can harm you and somehow get closer to liberation myself. That is the seed of violence, and it is the seed of all of the destruction that we are witnessing in our society today. The worldview that says, oh, we just need to kill all those people and then we will have peace. We just need to plunder the environment, then we will be more comfortable and we will be more liberated, right? And so the work of nonviolence is about using our bodies to say no to injustice, to having the courage to commit acts of civil disobedience, to try to force conversations that our society is refusing to have. But there's another layer to it, and that is the work of reminding ourselves and all of us that we belong to each other, that we belong to the earth, that we are part of the ecosystem that we live in every single day. So we're living in this time when we have to build a response, collective response to the biggest collective crises we have ever experienced as a species in the 300,000 year history of human beings, in the 4.2 billion years of life on Earth. This isn't the biggest crisis in the history of life on Earth, right? Like life will go on. The question is whether we will make it as a species and what kind of life we'll be able to lead. But certainly in the history of our species, this is the biggest crisis we've probably ever faced, right? So we need to build a response to that. And to do so, because the crisis is so large, it is so easy to respond to the crisis from our survival mechanisms. But again, if we look at the science, we know that once we go into our survival mechanisms, we can only see in binaries. We can only see in black and white. We can only see in us versus them. We can only see in that is the thing that is threatening me, and I need to do everything I can to either stop and slash hurt, kill that thing, or run away. And that is real. Like there are things that are threatening us, but there's a deeper level of reality in which the thing that is threatening us is actually a part of us, right? And we need to have the complexity. We need to be able to hold the complexity that both things are true. That there are people, individuals wielding and abusing power in ways that are causing so much harm and they need to be stopped. And we need to remember that those people are also part of this interwoven web of humanity. And that is the challenge that nonviolence is asking of us. And so I want to pause here and just open it up for any comments, reflections, questions, pushback, answers that you all may have. I was years ago, I was at a Buddhist meditation retreat, and there was a teacher who was giving a Dharma talk, and she ended her talk by saying, "All right, who's got some answers?" And so I really don't believe in this like Q&A format where we assume that all you have are questions and all I have are answers, because neither of that equation is true. And so I really want to welcome um, anything that you may have that you want to share in this moment. And so yeah, thank you all for being here, and I'll pause to see if there's anything you all want to share. Seeing some stuff in the chat too. So yeah, I see a hand from Danielle. Or is it Danielle? Daniel? Yeah, welcome. Are you able to unmute? We need to ask you to.
Can people not unmute themselves? Sorry, let me just check. Type for now and I'll just see if I can fix that.
Try now. I just asked you to unmute, so you might be able to. There you go.
Yeah, you did. Thank you. Thank you. I think you finished really importantly on this point that there is sort of no separation, and it's a bit of a logical fallacy that drives people to sort of want to hurt others for their own liberation. But like this is where I struggle with well-meaning and fight for liberation is I feel like in a lot of contexts when the conflict is so escalated, they feel like if they don't kill the other that they're gonna die, and that just comes from fear, right? And it's a really understandable fear because in a lot of cases it's more or less true. If they don't win whatever battle they're fighting, like that's sort of it for
Exactly.
them as a sort of conscious individual. I don't really know how to fight or break through that because it's a fairly good point. But at the same time, it really reinforces this culture of like we need to do the mass arrests and the killings of the elite of whoever it is because otherwise it's
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, it's true that like the threat is very real. Like the our ancestors who developed and evolved and gave us our nervous system, they were facing threats that were very real. Like if they didn't kill the thing that was chasing them, they might have died. And for many of us, for many people, like that is still the case today in the world that we live in. If you're living in Gaza, if you're living in, elsewhere, like that may be your physical reality. And it's important to remember that when we are at a political demonstration and risking arrest, risking tear gas, risking getting beaten, we may not, our lives may not be in physical danger, or at least be in the same level of risk, but our nervous system is not oftentimes evolved enough to recognize that. So when our nervous system gets kicked up and it goes into a state of panic because there's tear gas in the air, our nervous system doesn't know that our life may not be in danger. It's a really scary moment, but our nervous system thinks our life is in danger and we need to do everything we can to survive. And in my work, one of the things that we are really encouraging is, when I first started doing nonviolence trainings when I was 19 years old, I'm 45 now. We used to teach people how to build blockades and how to work with the police and how to get tear gas out of our eyes. And all of those things are still important. But one of the things we never learn how to do, and one of the things I'm trying to encourage now, is how do we regulate our emotions? How do we breathe together? How do we sing songs together? How do we sit in silence together and match our breathing with each other? How do we hum together? And these are all things that can regulate our nervous system even when there's tear gas in the air. And the settling of our nervous system connects us to the part of our brain that can remember that, oh, we are trying to heal our relationships with each other. That's what we're trying to do here. We're not just trying to survive. We're not just trying to beat those people over there. We have a larger mission to do in this moment. And so, in addition to learning to do the chants and getting tear gas out of our eyes, in our preparation for demonstrations, how are we learning to be in deep relationships with each other? How are we learning to look each other in the eye? As Bayo Komolafe says, how are we learning to notice who's in the room, right? Those are the things that will keep us grounded in the midst of collapse, in the midst of crises. Um, there's more things in the chat. Feel free to continue to raise your hand as well. How would you suggest approaching the cognitive dissonance of quiet peace and collective inaction? Yeah, so um, one of as an activist, I've been taught my entire life that one of the main purposes of nonviolent direct action is to build pressure and to be able to use that pressure to gain demands, right? To change legislation, to change policy, whatever that might be. And that's still true. But I'm also realizing that one of the intentions of direct action is to create cracks in the matrix. Right? Like we all live in the matrix. Most people who are in the matrix think that everything is normal. Everything is going according to plan. And to me, one of the ways that we can use creative nonviolent direct action is to create a crack in the matrix and to give people just a seed of doubt that everything is fine, that this is what peace is supposed to look like, that everything is going according to plan. The climate change might be an issue, but we still have a couple hundred years to figure it out, right? To use nonviolent direct action to create a sense of doubt, a sense of questioning. And this is one of the ways that I really want to invite people engaged in nonviolent direct action to really think creatively, because nonviolent direct action oftentimes looks the same no matter what issue you're organizing around, no matter where in the world you are. If you see a protest, you've seen that protest 1,000 times. And people who are not part of that protest look at that protest and say, oh, it's just another protest. And they don't question anything. And so, what are ways that we can use protest and nonviolent direct action to make people say, huh, like, what's going on there? What are those people doing? Right? I oftentimes think about like, what would happen if we shut down a major highway and a group of artists and indigenous ceremony leaders held a grief ritual to actually help people feel the grief of climate catastrophe. And then we had therapists and restorative justice facilitators on hand to pull bystanders in and say, what are you witnessing here? What are you feeling? What do you think is happening? How are you doing in this moment of climate catastrophe? Right? Like, what if we, like, to me, nonviolent direct action doesn't oftentimes do enough to get people to get bystanders, to get police, to get politicians to actually become introspective and ask questions about like, are we okay right now? Right? One of the biggest delusions in the world right now is that everything is fine, right? How can we use nonviolent direct action to pierce through that delusion, to pierce through that negative piece? I don't have the answer to that, but I really want to invite us to think more creatively about what our direct actions look like and how we can evoke emotions, how we can get people to be introspective. And I think that's one way that we can get people to snap out of that cognitive dissonance that, you know, every single year we see the hottest day on record, a historic flood, the worst forest fires in history. And then we say, yeah, but everything is fine. Like that cognitive dissonance, we need to shake people out of that, right? See a hand from, is it Maria? Apologize if I'm mispronouncing your name.
Thank you. Well, maybe I have a bit of an answer. And it's a type of, well, protest, some sort of an action. And I'm planning on doing, some marketing now, basically. It's womeninwhite.net. You know about it.
Yeah, oh yeah.
So it's vision. Maybe it's more of a strategy for a peaceful world. It's to gather 100,000 women dressed in white, trained, deeply trained in nonviolence, from everywhere, and from everywhere, anywhere in the world, going to a war zone to, well, stop the war and stop to bring people back to their humanity. So I think it's a beautiful idea and has something very visceral in it. And maybe it's women in white, it's not men in white. um, so if any women in this call, or maybe later watching the recording, would be interested in joining joining this, women in white don't call themselves organization or movement, more like a living organism. So if anyone would be interested in joining this living organism, well, we will gladly welcome you, I think. So it's womenandwhite.net. I can leave the link in the chat. So
Thank
thank
you for
you
that.
for this opportunity.
And shout out to my friends Mickey Kashtan and Katie Long, who are also part of that initiative. And it seems like Aida in the chat is also a co-founder. So thank you for that work. Also, just want to shout out Yuval in the chat. I feel like what's happening in Israel and Palestine and Gaza and also the West Bank right now is like one of the kind of like central spaces in our world where we have to figure out how to this in a moment of such urgency. So really grateful for your perspective and your work, Yuval. So we have 4 minutes, so maybe time for one more quick question, comment, answer, reflection. There's some more stuff in the chat as well. Excuse me. Um, just reading a couple of things from the chat. To have more tools to positively deal with ego and fear, read the book The Power of Now. It is the best book there is about the subject of going beyond the ego. How do we take action against injustice without the emotion that may be influencing our action, i.e., anger, being threaded through our movement? I will say that uh, Dr. Martin Luther King, I oftentimes joke, was one of the most pissed off people in the country at the time. I think there's a lot of space for anger in our movements. I think it's another misnomer about nonviolence is that like nonviolence is about teaching people not to be angry, which I think is dangerous. I think it's about teaching people to cultivate the right kind of anger and channeling it in the right directions and offering it in the right ways. Dr. Martin Luther King oftentimes used the word righteous indignation. Like we are righteous to be indignant about the state of the world. But I think one of the most important things to do is that oftentimes in our bodies, when anger arises, it co-arises with hatred. And hatred is poison, right? There's a beautiful quote, one of my favorites, that says, hating somebody is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. When we start hating people on the other side, that is an act of violence that we are actually doing to ourselves. Forget the other person. Like it is an act of violence that you are doing to yourself, right? And so doing the work that is necessary to notice when you are angry, how much of that is righteous indignation because your fellow human beings, your like other non-human life is being harmed. That is good. That is righteous. That is sacred. But then how much of that is actually leading you to say, F those people over there. I want to hurt those people. Because now you're also hurting yourself. And so being able to separate those two things out, and maybe even giving yourself contained space in movements. I think movements can benefit a lot from creating like containers to process our rage and to actually give ourselves space to say, I hate those people. I want those people dead. And to actually honor the part of us that feels that way, but to be able to release it in a contained space so that it doesn't get released without us recognizing that that's what's happening, right? So separating out the anger from the hatred, I think is really important work. And so, again, to me, this nonviolence, it's lifetimes of practice. But I really do appreciate every minute that I have to be able to engage in this practice. And so I see a couple of hands as time is up, and so I don't think we have time to get to them. I apologize for that. But I do want to encourage you all, if you have more conversations you want to have, just reach out to me. My website is kazuhaga.com, and the contact form comes directly to me. I really want to invite any sort of reflections, feedback, connections, relationships. This is all based on relationships. So I just want to, for this moment, thank you all for being part of this festival, for being part of this hour together. And Annabelle, I don't know if you have any other announcements or anything that you need to make, but really want to thank everyone that helped to organize this, and thank you all for being here.
Thank you so much,